Hello, welcome to a different kind of video for this channel. Today we won't be covering list reviews or tactics or formation analysis or anything like that. Today we're going to take a step back and look at just a modelling sort of video. And not necessarily a video about how, I'm not telling you how to model or paint or convert or anything like that. It's more of an evolution of a series of models. And what we'll be looking at, we've on the Scion train, or as I will call them now, Stormtrooper train, and we're going to actually have a look through the different models that have been put out by Games Workshop to represent the Stormtroopers, and sort of take a look at sort of their style and sort of the image that Games Workshop was putting across with the models they were releasing. So the first Stormtroopers that Games Workshop ever officially released were actually also, I think, the first plastic models they made, and they were almost snap fit. They came on slotter bases, and the body was all one piece, and I think all you had to glue on was the gun and the head. And that's a picture of what I've got in front of us now, the first generation Stormtroopers. And you can see they were going for, a very sort of contemporary, sort of 20th going in 20, late 20th century, early 21st century style of model. So these guys, to me, I think they look great, obviously, and these are just some pictures that I've just pulled off the internet. So, credit to whoever painted these. I did not paint these. I didn't paint any of the models that I'm going to put up here today. But the style that is obviously going for, and these models that Games Workshop put out were sort of modern day, sort of Cold War style, maybe end of World War II, Korean Cold War style special forces. Not necessarily I'm not necessarily talking like sort of SAS Delta Force kind of special forces here, but more sort of Royal Marines or VDV, stuff like that. Like they are literally stormtroopers. Which were sort of, similar, they're line infantry, but sort of line infantry +1. So they're not there to fight the long firefights. They sort of, they do, like they take part of, frontal assaults, but, they're more they think individually, they have sort of more specialist equipment. This was the first sort of iteration of Stormtroopers, and this is reflected well in their models. The regular sort of Cadia models had big sort of armor-plated shoulder pads and helmets and that kind of jazz. Whereas these guys they look a lot more lightly armored, but their equipment is obviously a lot better. They've got berets. That's just singles them out as being more elite. Their guns are better. They've got big backpacks on. They're obviously used to dropping behind enemy lines. So for me, these models definitely portray a sort of paratrooper style that Games Workshop was going for. So, and I don't know what the rules were like for these guys. They were unfortunately before my time. But they definitely give off an air of sort of line infantry +1, these models for me would work just as well for veterans as they would for Stormtroopers. So that's that's the vibe I'm getting, and I think that's what Games Workshop were going for, and I'm pretty sure that's how their rules sort of worked. This is before you could blob up your guardsmen, remember? So, these guys would be directly compared to on the battlefield. They would be compared to your line infantry, so they would be operating in a similar fashion, but should be, as a single squad, but they should be expected to be able to operate independently. I think, because they're obviously able to take multiple plasma guns or melter guns, and they're able to, they can't take any heavy weapons. Now, I think actually these Stormtroopers, when they were first, and I think there are actually heavy weapon squads for these Stormtroopers, so that's kind of interesting. But I don't think I don't know, I haven't seen any models for them, but I do believe you could actually get them. So I think this version of Games Workshop models, sorry to sort of be a bit of a hypocrite, they give off an air of sort of being fast on the move, elites sort of soldiers, but I think they did essentially function as line infantry, +1. If that makes sense. Next level line infantry. They're better equipment and stuff like that. So, and the models, as I've said, they reflect that. They look like soldiers. That's what I wanted to come on to. These guys look like soldiers. They don't look like fancy, sci-fi sort of guys. If you got rid of the sort of power cables coming out the lasguns there, or hellguns as they were called back then, if you got rid of the power cables and the guns and replace them with, maybe M16s or AK-47s, some kind of modern rifle, maybe a FAL if they were to be British paratroopers. You got rid of the plasma gun and you gave someone a GPMG melter gun. You gave them like a law or something like that, some kind of rocket launcher. They could easily have passed for modern day soldiers, So I think that's what Games Workshop were going for in that regard. This was the first, just to sum up, the first lot of pictures. The first picture. I feel like these were quite safe models that Games Workshop released. They hadn't gone full sci-fi. Obviously you had your Space Marines, but these are second edition models. These guys were released as, these guys fitted in with the theme of Guard at the time, which was sort of World War II in space. You had mass infantry waves with armoured support. And you can see, these models, they just look like normal soldiers. And you'll see there's this flip between styles, and you'll see this there's this sort of flip with Games Workshop where they go from models that look like soldiers to models that look like sci-fi to models that look like soldiers to blah 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 blah. This back and forth, and I definitely feel like we'll see this with the next style of Stormtrooper that's coming up, just in the next frame. Now I'm not sure how far after. Here we go. I'm not sure how far after. How much later, I should say, that this style of Stormtrooper was released. But these were the ones that were pictured in both third edition codexes. So I imagine these were released along with the first Guard third edition codex, because there were actually two third edition codexes, one at the beginning of third and one at the end of third edition. And the one that was released at the end of third edition also served Guard all the way through fourth edition. And then we got another codex in fifth edition, the one which is the one I love, obviously, with the respawning conscripts. But that's getting distracted or going off topic. These were the second iteration of Stormtroopers, and you can see they look completely different to the original iteration. A lot more sci-fi. You can, the helmets, the whole style, I would say, is a lot more original. I feel like it's a lot more home-brewed by Games Workshop. And I really, really like these models. I must say, I'm going to come out now and say these are my favourite kind of Stormtrooper models. I've been scouring the internet for years, trying to find a group of these models. I just want a squad or two at a reasonable price, but unfortunately they go for absolute gold. Absolute gold. I mean, I'd have to sell a kidney to be able to afford some of these. It's £5 minimum starting bid on eBay, for example, for one of these guys. So, hint, hint, if anyone's got any of these guys out there that they want to give or sell to me, I will probably, if you give me a reasonable price, I'll jump at the shop. But going back on topic, these are my favourite models. These guys, to me, they ooze eliteness. They're still coming across as soldiers, but they're very sci-fi now. But if you look at the style of sort of hood / helmet, I can never decide if that's a helmet or a hood. It looks, it's like a hood and a helmet at the same time. So cool. The sort of strange sci-fi kind of gas mask that they've got. If they haven't got the gas mask, you've got the guys who've got like the land warrior sort of eyepiece, the one that you see in sort of Halo. These guys, I honestly think that the Halo Marines, the Marines in Halo for the UNSC, I believe that in Halo 1, some inspiration was taken from these guys. The helmet's very similar. The way the armor on the Marines is in Halo is very similar. Not direct. I'm not saying Halo ripped them off. I'm just saying there's definitely some influence taken. And what these guys, speaking of Marines in Halo, what these guys came across as, whereas the first iteration were like paratroopers, these guys came across as Marines in space. And whenever I used to read books about naval armsmen, I always imagined them like these guys. I don't know why. Or, with the helmets, I always imagine the naval armsmen having the same sort of hood / helmet. And honestly, these guys, they've jumped up a notch from the old Stormtroopers. They're absolutely covered in equipment. Whereas the old Stormtroopers had a sort of a grenade and like a rifle and a backpack, these guys ain't fucking around. They've got grenades and pouches everywhere. Their equipment looks completely different to standard guard equipment. Their Helguns look like a completely different kind of weapon. The first generation Stormtroopers, they basically look like Cadian Lascars with a power cable coming out the back. These ones look like a completely unique sort of weapon. They've got scopes on the guns, which actually served a function. They were targeters in the book, which allowed you to pre-measure, because no other codex allowed you to pre-measure. No rules allowed you to pre-measure before 6th edition. All the way up until 5th edition, you couldn't pre-measure, but targeters allowed you to pre-measure. I absolutely love these models. I can't say it enough. Even their grenade launchers look different to the normal grenade launchers of the time. They're smaller, they're more compact. These guys look like they are dressed to kill. They look less. They're a completely different style. I feel like the original Stormtroopers gave off this air of light, fast-moving, sort of airborne paratrooper sort of feel. And these guys bring across a much more heavily armoured, heavily armed, take no prisoners, maxed out equipment, sci-fi Stormtroopers. These guys, to me, they earned the name Stormtroopers. Their job was to storm positions. Because remember, we're still at the time when you couldn't blob squads. So trying to assault a position with a platoon of guardsmen was really hard, because you only got 10-man squads. They only had a 5-up arm save. They only got one special weapon. You couldn't move and shoot with your heavy weapons, obviously, at all. There's no snap firing. You couldn't move and shoot. And so you struggle to assault a position with regular guardsmen, but these guys, they had the better armor save, the better equipment. You can see that just on them. They can take more equipment, and they could assault positions. They could storm positions, and I feel like that's much better captured in these models. And I feel like this generation of Stormtroopers was when they actually gained their focus as elite soldiers. In the old iteration, they were like normal line infantry +1. These guys were clearly a separate entity. And don't forget, these models were also used for the Inquisitorial Stormtroopers. So overall, they gave off a much more elite vibe. These guys were SAS. These guys, these guys were specialized SAS, proper special forces. The other Stormtroopers were more sort of paratroopers, line infantry, but with a bit more mojo thrown in. But very, very sci-fi. That's the key here. We've switched to sci-fi. Now, these are some of the Stormtroopers that 99% of Guard players out there will recognize. These are the Kazakin. These models were released at the same time as the Codex Eye of Terror, when Abaddon was launching one of his many Black Crusades. And these guys flip back to soldiers, where these guys look like soldiers. They look like heavily armored guardsmen. That's the way that they were portrayed by Games Workshop as well. They wore camouflage schemes, in sort of woodland camouflage. That's how you always saw them. The others, very similar paint scheme to what we saw in the first generation Stormtroopers. And they played similarly to this as well, because you could take these guys, you could take multiple squads of them, number one, and at the time of when the second 3rd edition codex came out for Guard, which I'll just call 4th edition for easiness, when the 4th edition Guard codex came out, you had the regimental doctrines, the skills and drills, and that allowed you to take veterans, or should I say, it allowed you to take squads of guardsmen with carapace armor called grenadier squads. And so this allowed you to field entire armies. This was the first instance of when, in 4th edition, when you could field entire armies of stormtroopers. You'd have your actual stormtroopers, and then you would have your grenadier squads, which were like stormtroopers, but they couldn't deep strike, couldn't infiltrate, nothing like that. And so, again, this is this, as I was talking about before, this is this flip back from sort of contemporary to sci-fi back to contemporary. Now these guys, they obviously have a sci-fi vibe to them, but correct me if I'm wrong here, but I feel like these were like near future style, like maybe sort of these are what the soldiers will look like in sort of the year 2050 kind of thing. They've still got very obvious sort of just designs of soldiers to them. They've got a very sort of normal looking helmet, very normal looking armor pieces, normal looking sort of backpack. We've gone back to the old style guns. They don't look quite as sci-fi. Obviously, still got the power cables coming out of the back, but these are basically back to normal lasgun style. Basically, the grenade launcher is the normal size grenade launcher for the Guard. The flamer is the normal size flamer. These guys have gone away from being elite special forces vibe to, again, line infantry +1, or line infantry alpha, whatever you want to call it. These guys again give off the impression of essentially functioning like normal soldiers, but maybe with a bit better equipment, whereas the other second editions or second iteration stormtroopers, they gave off this much more cool, elite vibe, absolutely oozing menace. I'm not saying these guys aren't cool. I own 3 5-man squads, I should say, of Kazakin. So roughly 15 in total. But I just don't like them as much as the other stormtroopers at all. I love those second edition ones. I haven't got my hands on any. I have a friend who had a full fucking squad of them, and man, I offered to buy them off him for many times, and he would not sell them. Whereas these guys, they're still tricky to pick up, but it's actually, and I'm not endorsing this in any way, but it's actually incredibly easy to get your hands on these models because China. Because of China, there's a lot of China cast out there. I've dabbled in China cast, I will admit, and I will say I'll never do it again. I tried once, and I bought a couple of Lehman Russes China, and they're terrible. Don't buy China cast vehicles, but if you are going down that route, I have to be careful what I say here because I can't really endorse fraud, which is what it is. But if you are considering the China cast route, the only advice I can give you is go for the infantry, because you can get China cast Kazakin. And, sort of 1 in 5 of them is a bit fucked up and the mold's completely gone, but the others are fine, from what I've heard. I actually haven't, I honestly don't own any, but from what I've heard, they're alright, the China cast Stormtroopers. Just expect sort of if you buy a squad of 10, expect 2 to 3 of them to be a bit gummy and shit, and the rest to be alright. But going back to the style of the models, again, and the way they were portrayed in the codex, Kazakin they were explained in they were described, I should say, in the fluff as, you know, when the line normal guardsman of Cadia fights and does really well, they can often be inducted up into the Kazakin, or if recruits in Cadia, white shields show particular, skill and ferocity and loyalty, then they will be taken into the Kazakin. But their roots are again in normal contemporary foot-slogging soldiery, and that was reflected in their fluff, and that was reflected in the way you could take these guys. You could take, you could take 6 squads of them, which at the time was like, wow, that's loads of stormtroopers. That's fucking big deal. And they were some of the most popular armies out there, and it's where the Grenadier doctrine comes from in our current codex. It's a nod. It's a nod of the head to people who, made loads and loads of Grenadier squads, and that's why it's also a reason why veterans, when the new card codex came out, why veterans were moved from the elite slot to the troop slot, and why they were allowed to take carapace armor. Because back in the 5th edition codex and in the 6th edition codex, because back in 4th edition, you had this skills and drills. This, when you could build your own regiment, you had this ability to take guardsmen in carapace armor as grenadiers, and so many people did it, and these Kazakin models were sold so successfully because of it, that Games Workshop actually switched veterans from elites to troops. Because back in the day, for you new recruits into the Guard, you could only take 1 squad of veterans. That's it. 1 squad of veterans, and they couldn't get carapace armor. They were normal guardsmen that had access to 3 special weapons, but a bolter was considered a special weapon. You could buy a bolter for one of your guardsmen for 3 points, and you got access to 1 heavy weapon. And that's all they had. That's all they had. They were basically just guardsmen with 3 special weapons. Or you could take a veteran sergeant, and you used to have to pay for your veteran sergeants. And if you paid for them, he could take special weapons from the armory, when we had the armory and not the equipment list. Go back and have a look at some of the old veterans. Get yourself an old codex. You'll see how interesting, how much veterans have changed. And now, as you can see, it's flipped onto the next lot of pictures. Now we have 4th edition Stormtroopers, nicknamed, or I should say renamed, Tempestus Scions, Militarum Tempestus. And as you can see, these guys are completely different to anything we've had before. They're sci-fi turned up to 11. I mean, if they're meant to be sort of, we've done the flip again. We had contemporary Stormtroopers berets, and then we had sci-fi armed to the teeth soldiers, but they still look like soldiers, but they were definitely sci-fi. And they could pass as inquisitorial Stormtroopers as well. And then we flipped back in 3rd edition, or 3rd iteration, I should say, to Kazakin, which were definitely soldiers, definitely line infantry +1. And now we flipped super hard into the sci-fi realm. I mean, look at these guys. I'm not complaining. I like the models, but these are very 40k. These are very unique to 40k. Okay? I mean, there's a few nods here and there to older style models, but these guys are their own thing. So one of the big nods to the older style Stormtroopers is the gun. The gun that we have here is a combination of the old style of the 2nd edition Stormtroopers and the 3rd and 1st edition Stormtroopers. Because you've got the style of the actual weapon itself with the barrel, and the whole gun itself with the targeters and everything on top. That's obviously 2nd iteration Stormtrooper, but the power cable coming out the back and looping round, that's definitely obviously 1st and 3rd edition. So we've got that nod. The hell you can equip these Scions with berets. That's obviously a nod to the 1st edition Stormtroopers, no doubts about it. And they are all, it's a completely different style, but all of the helmeted Scions have got respirators, or most of them have got respirators, or what looks like respirators, which is a bit of a nod to the 3rd edition. So these guys have got little nods here and there to the different stormtroopers, but are obviously in overall style completely differently. These guys don't come across, and this is something which I think is both good and bad, but these guys don't come across as a branch of the military. Okay? I think this was done to make them look completely different to the Imperial Guard because they were getting their own codex. But these guys do not look anything like the military. They look like what they're meant to look like, which is how they've been portrayed in the fluff, as a completely separate subfaction within the Imperium whose job is to go and seek out high priority targets and murder them. They're not necessarily special forces. They're not going around, sabotaging rail lines and destroying, post offices and random shit like that. These guys are clearly, but they're not also really in the style of, doing a frontal assault, being a stormtrooper, being a heavily armored stormtrooper. No, the vibe that these guys give off is kill team. They are a squad of assassins, almost. Their job is to go in and absolutely murder one thing. That's the vibe they're giving off. Because look at the helmets, look at the face plates and the masks, look at the general sort of style of the model. It doesn't look Imperial Guard. It looks evil. I have thought that if someone wanted to make really good blood-packed soldiers from the Gaunt's Ghost novels, they could use the heads of the stormtroopers, not the bodies obviously, but the heads of the stormtroopers, and put them on regular guardsman models. That would make blood-packed so quickly. And again, their armor is almost like a throwback to sort of Napoleonic times. It looks a bit ancient. They're not wearing a flak jacket. They're not wearing armor, sort of modern day contemporary armor. These guys are wearing a fucking breastplate. This is old style cuirassier sort of armor. Napoleonic cavalry style armor. They've got little flappy bits at the bottom of the armor. This is a breastplate in the most traditional sense of the word. Now you can see like the knee pads and the shoulder pads and the elbow pads. They're still sort of normal, sort of to a certain extent normal traditional stormtrooper style. But the helmets and the breastplates, they are completely different. These guys ooze like dark, shady branch of the Imperium, and that's how they're represented in their fluff as well. They're not the traditional stormtroopers that we know. That's something that people have to sort of realize now. The old style stormtroopers that we know and love, they are represented as stormtroopers in the Imperial Guard Codex. You can take platoons of them, and their job, and they can take chimeras, dedicated transports, and their job is to bust open a fortified position. Or you can take veterans in chimeras with carapace armor, or veterans with carapace armor, and you get your old style grenadiers, and again, they're designed for frontal assaults, busting open objectives. These guys don't, and if I was to say which models you should use for stormtroopers in the Guard Codex, I would say you should use Kazakin. That's the vibe they give off. That's the style that's portrayed in the Guard Codex. Traditional style stormtroopers. For these Scion models, if you were collecting Militarum Tempestus, I think you should use Tempestus Scion models, because that's how they're meant to come across. These guys are not stormtroopers. They do not do well, or they should not really be used as frontline assault troops. They are a scalpel. The old style stormtroopers were a mixture of scalpel and sledgehammer. These guys are pure scalpel. You know, the old style Stormtroopers, you could have lots of, you know, let's just talk about 5th edition. You could have veterans and chimeras, carapace armor, they would be your hammer, and then you could have some of the other Stormtroopers deep striking behind, doing, you know, wreaking havoc, and they would be your scalpel. Now, if we're looking at Tempest of Scions, fluff-wise, and as a standalone faction, their job is pure scalpel, precision strikes. There's a target, let's fucking murder it. That's the style of model, whether Games Workshop meant it or not. But the style of these guys is not soldier, it's murderer. That's their style. Maybe that's a bit dark, maybe a bit grim. When you think about it, maybe a bit fucked up and a bit sick. But that's how they have been modelled. These guys are stone cold, very sci-fi, evil, just evil. They are the Imperium's evil. And they also come across what I think is really cool as like maybe more traditional style witch hunter Stormtroopers. Because obviously back in the day, long ago, in a galaxy far, far, in an edition far, far away, Stormtroopers could be taken as part of Grey Knights, and they could be taken as part as demon hunters, and they could be taken in the Imperial Guard. And I feel like these Stormtroopers would look really good in a traditional demon hunter style army. They definitely come across as what could be like the personal army of some sort of, you know, fucked up witch hunter, not demon hunter, witch hunter side. These guys come across definitely as witch hunter Stormtroopers. You know, they've got think about Sisters of Battle, their armor, it's very ornate, it's very traditional style, it's very gothic looking. That's the word I'm looking for. I kept thinking Latin. What I'm thinking is gothic. These guys come across as gothic. They definitely would work well in a traditional, good old-fashioned throwback to witch hunters. That's their style. They are designed for hunting enemies down. They are modelled to be hunters, not soldiers. Murderers, not soldiers. That's their style. And I like it as its own thing, as its own sub-faction. But honestly, they're not my favourite models. In terms of Stormtroopers, these guys, you know, traditional guard style Stormtroopers, I would almost say these are my least favourite. They're not traditional Stormtroopers, they're not carapace assault troops. But as their own thing, as their own unique thing, I think they're amazing. I I really like the models. But just to sum up, guys, my favourite are the second edition Stormtroopers. I really want to know what you guys think. What's your favourite Stormtrooper model? Do you like the new ones? Do you not? Do you prefer the Kazakin? Do you prefer the pre-Kazakin Stormtroopers? The Inquisitorial style ones? Let me know. Hope you enjoyed this video. I know it's a bit long-winded, it's just me talking, but I hope you found it just fun to listen to, and it was meant to be something a little different to what I normally put out. So thank you, and I'll see you guys next time.